And if you want to instantly know any of the future sessions we do, make sure to follow us on social media channels. In the chat, we have given links to our Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn pages. ITP Guide is only a part of the many sessions we do, so make sure to follow us. And if we move forward with our next speaker, she is Dilmi Palliyaguruge, who is here to make your project easy with trending technologies and GitHub. Hello, Dilmi. Over to you.
Thank you, Shadini. So I think after the previous session, now you all are having a good idea about what is ITP and how to manage your project successfully. So having that idea on your mind, let's move on to another important segment, which will be much benefited for your ITP. So I'm Dilmi Palliyaguruge, a third-year software engineering undergraduate and intern at LOC Technologies, and also a member of MS Club. So these are the topics that I'm going to discuss today. So without taking much time, let's move on to the topics. So do you know what an API is? Maybe some of y'all are having an idea about this API, but I think most of y'all are not familiar with APIs. So I'll explain it from a real world example. As you can see, this is a picture of a restaurant. So imagine that you have gone to a restaurant and sitting at a table with a menu that you want to order the food. And if you want to order the food, what you have to do is you have to make your request to the kitchen. So how can you do that? Because you don't have access to the kitchen, right? So the only way to do that is through a waiter. So what you have to do is you have to select the food you want from the menu and hand over it to the waiter. When a waiter gets your order, he will take it to the kitchen and ask the chefs to make the food, and after the food is made, he will deliver it back to you. So the communication between the customer and the kitchen is made through this waiter. Actually, in here, waiter acts as the communication link between the customer and the kitchen, because the customers don't have access to the kitchen, and they don't know the process behind the kitchen, and the people in the kitchen don't have access to the customers. So the communication between customers and the kitchen is made through this waiter. Likewise, we can apply this scenario to your application. As mentioned in this, as displayed in this picture, the front end can be represented by the front side of the restaurant, and the back end can be represented by the kitchen, and the APIs can be represented by the waiters. So we can, as I said, since we can apply this to this real world scenario to the application, as I said before, in that scenario, the communication between the customer and the kitchen is made through this waiter. So likewise, the communication between the front end and the back end is done through this API. If I take a real world example, okay, let's say there is a mobile payment application and you want to pay a water bill. What you have to do is you have to provide the details that to make the payment, and once you click on that payment button, the relevant API will be called to the backend server, and after the backend process is done, it will send back a response and it will be displayed to the client. So the communication between the backend and the front end is made through this API. As you can see, actually this displays the previous example I explained, right? So this is this can be considered as the client side, the client, and this is the server side. When a client makes a request, the API gets the request and sends it back to the server. After the backend processing is done, it will send back the response to the API, and the API will display it on the front end, right? Okay, I'll explain another real-world example which will be more familiar to you. I think all of you all are having a Facebook account, and assume that assume that there are two people, person A and person B. So if person A wants to send a request to person B, what he has to do is he has to click on that add friend button, right? Once he click on that add friend button, the relevant API will be called and a request will be sent to the person B. Then he will be notified that the person A has requested to be your friend, and he will be given an option to select whether to confirm it or to delete it, right? Once the person B confirms the request, the response will be sent back to the person A, and he will be notified saying that the person B has accepted your request. So this is the basic functionality of an API. Actually, the communication between, as I said earlier, the communication between the front end and the back end is done via an API. API is a communication link between the front end and the back end. So why are we talking about APIs this much? Actually, in your previous project in OP, you were asked to develop a project based on Java servlets, right? So what happens in a servlet is when a client makes a request, it will go to the web server, and web server redirects the request to the relevant servlet. And after the process is done, it will send back the response to the web server, and web server delivers it to the client. So there is no separate backend and front end in this scenario, right? But in your ITP project, I think you have to develop a separate backend and a separate front end. So how can you connect these things? How can you connect these two? The only way to connect a backend and a front end is the API, right? So up to now, if you all are having any questions related to the things that I have discussed, you can ask them in the chat. We'll try our best to answer the questions once the session is over. Okay, let's move on. When you're talking about APIs, another thing that we cannot forget is HTTP methods. I think you all are familiar with these HTTP methods because in your previous semester, you were asked to use those HTTP methods. Mainly, we use these HTTP methods: get, post, put, delete, and patch. And we use get to retrieve data from database, and we use post to add data to the database, and we use put to update a record, and we use delete to delete a record, and we use patch to partially update, right? So actually these HTTP methods represent the request type of the API, right? Whether it is a get method or the API, whether the API is a get method or a post method. So likewise, you can give the relevant HTTP method type based on your requirement. And JSON objects. What are JSON objects? Actually, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. This JSON is actually a format. As I said earlier, when we are sending a request to the API and when we are getting a response from the API, there should be a specific format, right? And this format can be XML or JSON. In our case, we use JSON format. And here is an example for a JSON object. And there are some key features in JSON objects. This is called a key value pair, and this is the key username. Here the username is key, and the name given for that is the value. I mean, in here, this name represents the value. So the keys should always be in a string format, and the values can take any data type. And these should be separated by a comma. Okay, I'll show you a small example for an API. So this is the API we use to get the COVID related details, right? So it has a separate backend, and actually we don't know the backend process here. And the backend has been hosted in a separate server, and this is the host URL, right? As mentioned in this document, it is a get method, which means when you call this API, we can retrieve data from the database, right? So I'll just show you how to invoke this. Actually, I don't know. I'm not sure whether you all are familiar with Postman. Postman can be used mainly for API testing. There are other purposes as well, but we use Postman mainly for API testing. And yeah, and here when you click on this plus button, you can go to this interface, and in here when you type, you can type the URL of the API, and from here you can change the HTTP method of the relevant API. Since this is a get method, I select it as get. Once I send the request, but once I click this send button, the request will be sent to the backend server, and after the process, it will return a response. So this is the response that I get. It gives all the COVID related details, and as I said earlier, this is a JSON. This is what you call a JSON object. So all the key features are there. So likewise, you can use different types of APIs, right? Actually, this is an external API. Assume that you are going to develop a hospital management system, and you want to display the details of the COVID related details. In such cases, you can use this API, right? The only thing, what you have to do is you have to call this API for the relevant part. Then it will return the response of the data, COVID related details, so that you can display that in your application. So likewise, you can use external APIs. I'll give you a small example. In our ITP project, we used some natural language processing APIs, because we developed a gym management system. So there was a point that we need to get details from by adding data, we need to get details related to the data that has been added, right? So what we did was, actually we surfed through internet, and finally we found out an API related to that. So likewise, you can use external APIs for your application where necessary. Okay, I'll go back to the slide again. Postman for API testing. As I mentioned earlier, Postman can be used for testing purposes. Actually, there are other purposes as well, but we use Postman mainly for API testing. So after you develop your application, after the development is finished, you should test your APIs before delivering it to the client, right? For that, you can use Postman. If you want to test your API in code level, you can use Postman. So if you are not familiar with this tool, you can just go to their website, and there are lots of there are lots of resources that you can learn the process of Postman. So I recommend you all to find the knowledge. I mean, don't wait till, as Dilmi said, don't wait till someone is teaching you. Just go and find the knowledge so that you can make your application a good one. So, do you all have any questions related to the things I discussed? Okay, we'll try to answer the questions after the session is over. Okay, let's move on to another important segment. As Lasal said in this previous session, Lasal discussed about frameworks. Now you might wonder what this framework is or what he was talking about, right? So I'll give you all a brief introduction about what a framework is. As described in the, this is the definition for a framework. So as given in the definition, it says framework is an application framework acts as the skeletal support to build an application. You didn't get it, right? So, okay, I'll explain it from the image, from a real world example. As you can see, this is a structure of a house, right? So actually, it is, let's say, a skeletal of the house, right? So everything we build, so we are building everything around the structure. So likewise, when we come to the frameworks, the framework, so if you are developing a code in framework, there is a specific skeleton. Actually, a framework is built on top of a language. Okay, let's say if we take Spring Boot. Spring Boot is a framework designed for Java language, and it is built on top of Java language, right? Now, if we use a pure language like Java, there are a certain set of syntaxes and rules that you have to follow when you're developing, right? But when you use a framework, you don't need to follow them every time, because everything, as I said earlier, a framework is built on top of a language. So you don't have to write when you're developing, you don't have to write everything from the beginning. So if I move on, there are lots of frameworks that you can use. I think Lasal gave a comprehensive explanation regarding frameworks, so I'm not going to explain it again. Okay, I'll just give a brief idea. So if you're familiar with frameworks like, no, if you're familiar with language like Java, you can go for a framework like Spring Boot. So if you're familiar with PHP, you can go for Laravel. And if you're familiar with Python, you can go for a framework like Django or Flask. And I think most of the students are now familiar with JavaScript, because you guys were seeking knowledge, right? So I think most of you all are now familiar with JavaScript. So I recommend you all to go for a framework like Express. And actually, although I mentioned React as a React under the framework, it's actually not a framework, it's a library. Okay, so why we should use a framework? Is it mandatory to use? No, right? So there are several benefits. The main reason is the development will be easy if you use a framework, right? Because as I said earlier, since it is built on top of a language, you don't have to build everything from the scratch. So it will be much benefited when you're developing large applications. So it will reduce the time that you have to spend for the application, for the development. And the other thing is, there is a high demand in the industry for the employees who have knowledge on different types of frameworks. I'll show you some examples. These are some job requirements I took from LinkedIn, and as you can see, most of the companies are seeking for the employees who are having knowledge in at least 2 or 3 frameworks. So in the third year, you are going to do an internship, right? So when you are doing an internship, if you have used a framework in your previous developments, it will be much benefited. So I highly recommend you all to use a framework in your ITP project, because that will be an added advantage when you are going for the internship, because you can say then that I have knowledge in this and I have knowledge in that. So likewise, and there are a number of resources, there are plenty of resources that you can follow to learn about these frameworks. Okay. So how to choose the stack? Assume that you're developing an application for a school management system, and another group is developing an application for a online payment platform. So if we take online payment platform, there are some complex functions, right? There are payment processes, and if you can use actually machine learning as well in your application. So if you're planning to use those kind of heavy tasks, you can go for a framework like Spring Boot, Laravel, or Django. If you're familiar with Java, you can go for Spring Boot. If you're familiar with PHP, you can go for Laravel, and if you're familiar with Python, you can go for Django. If we take the school management system, actually there are not much heavy tasks. We have only there are simple tasks like adding students to the school and marking their attendance. So likewise, if your application consists of only input-output operations, you can go for a JavaScript framework. So be mindful when you're selecting a stack or when you're selecting a framework to develop your application. Okay, I'll show you some websites. Actually, this site, I'll share the link once the session is over. You can refer these documents, right? So everything is explained here. How to choose a front-end framework for your application. So likewise, I recommend you all to follow these documentations and go through these sites. Then only you can get a clear idea about what this framework is and what are the front-end frameworks that you can use. So likewise, there is another good site if you want to learn about backend frameworks. So I'll share this link as well. So everything is explained here. So you can go through these slides and go through these websites and get knowledge. Okay. The other important thing that you have to consider when you are developing your application is the database. I know that almost everyone is familiar with SQL databases, but I don't know how many of you all are familiar with NoSQL databases. Actually, how to choose a database for your application. So I think before you're developing your application, you all are gathering information. The requirements, right? So if you are confident about that your requirements are not going to change in the middle of the development, or if your requirements are well defined, you can go for a database like SQL. Right? Actually, SQL database is relational. What I meant by relational is it refers to some kind of a table in the database, right? And it is table based, as you all know, it is table based. But what is the difference between this SQL and non-SQL? So as I said earlier, if you're more confident about that your requirements are not going to change in the middle of the development, you can go for SQL. So likewise, if you are not sure about the requirements, I mean, if the requirements are not well defined when you start the project, better go for a database like NoSQL. Actually, NoSQL databases are non-relational, which means they don't refer to a table in the database, and it is document-based and graph-based. What I meant by document-based is, as you can see, this is an example for a SQL table, and this is an example for a NoSQL document, right? In SQL, you store data in a table, but when it comes to NoSQL, you store data in documents in JSON format, right? I think now we all are having an idea about what JSON is. So as you can see, in NoSQL databases, they store data in JSON format. And the other thing is, here is a snapshot I took from MongoDB, because MongoDB is the most commonly used NoSQL database. And in MongoDB, I mean, in NoSQL databases, there are no tables, right? They have collections. And this collection represents a table in a SQL database, right? So can you all understand the difference between these two now? So once again, I'm saying, if you all are having any questions related to the things I discussed about, please raise them in the chat so that we can answer them at the end of the session. So as I said earlier, MongoDB is the most commonly used NoSQL database, and Cosmos DB can also be taken, and MySQL and MariaDB are the examples for SQL databases. So why people go for a NoSQL database without choosing a SQL database? So as I said earlier, the main reason is the flexibility. So as you can see in this image, you can see within the past few years, there is a rapid increase in the usage of NoSQL databases, and there's a decrease in usage of SQL databases. So why developers go for NoSQL databases is the reason I said earlier, right? Most of the times when we are starting a development of an application, we are not sure. I mean, requirements might change in the middle of the development. So you don't have to put much effort if you use a NoSQL database, right? But if you use a SQL database, you have to put some effort to add those changes. So that will be the most important factor. People choose NoSQL databases over SQL databases. And the other important thing is, now most of the time, nowadays, most of the companies are seeking for employees who are having knowledge on NoSQL databases. So as I said before, in next year, you all are going to do an internship. So this will be an added advantage if you use NoSQL databases, because actually, if you are having a LinkedIn profile, just go through the job requirements. Most of the companies are seeking for the employees or interns who are having knowledge in trending technologies, right? So trending frameworks and NoSQL databases. So likewise, I recommend you all to use a NoSQL database, because that will be benefited when you are doing an internship. Okay, so we have come to the last topic of our session. I mean, my session. Maybe I think almost everyone has heard about GitHub, but do you know what is version controlling is? As mentioned in this definition, the version controlling is the practice of managing and tracking changes to software code. What does it mean? Actually, I had to tell this. In this session, I'm just guiding you how to choose a specific stack or how to choose framework and the usage of GitHub. But there is another practical session, so you will be getting a comprehensive idea about those technologies and how to use these technologies in that practical session. So I kindly request you all to participate for that session too. Then you all can get a complete idea about this GitHub and the frameworks that I have discussed about. So in this session, I'm just giving you the idea of the usage of GitHub for what you're using GitHub, right? Okay, I'll go for an example like this. Okay, I'll take your ITP group. In your ITP group, there are 8 members. So how can you know whether your friend has developed her part, or but how can you identify the errors that occurs when you are developing? So it will take much time if you go and manually check the code. So, and there is no way to track the progress of the developers, right? The progress of the members of the group. So in such cases, in order to overcome those problems, you can use a version controlling system, right? Actually, there are lots of version controlling systems. You can use GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket, but I also recommend to use GitHub because you can do everything in one place, right? I'll just show you the interface of GitHub. And another thing, if you're using GitHub, I mean, before you're going to use GitHub, you have to install Git in your machine, right? You can go to their official site, and there is a link that you can download Git, and you have to download before using the GitHub. And the other thing is that all of the 8 members should have a GitHub account before using this version controlling system. So this is the interface of GitHub, and this, once you create a profile, it will display it here, and you can create organizations and repositories in GitHub. So what is this organization, right? So you can actually create an organization from here, and the benefit of having an organization is now in each semester we are having a group project. So if you keep all your group projects in one place, it will be a mess, right? So if you keep those projects in separate organization for separate semesters, so it will be much easy for you to review the code, or I mean, if you want to see the code even after 2-3 years, you can easily find them, right? So I recommend you all to create organization before applying your project to GitHub, because for each semester you can have an organization, and it will be neat instead of using everything in one place, it will be neat if you use organizations for separate semesters. And the other thing is you can create repositories. The repository is one place, I mean, it's something that you can store your project code, I mean, the project files, right? So when you're developing a project, the first thing you have to do is, first of all, you have to create a repository. Then you can add your project into that repository, and you can, okay, if I go inside a repository, actually you can track everything from here. Right now, there are 8 members in a group, and you can track the contribution of each members of your group, right? So likewise, there are so many benefits of using a version controlling system, and you will be given a comprehensive idea about the usage of GitHub and how to use GitHub in our second session. It's actually a practical session. So make sure to participate for that session as well. Actually, my objective was to give you all a brief idea about GitHub and the technologies before participating for that session. So when you're going for that session, you will be having a good knowledge about these things, right? So and the other thing is there is a contribution chart in GitHub, and once you contribute for repositories, it will be displayed by this chart, right? You can view it if you go to your profile. And another thing that I want to tell is, so there may be some questions related to the things I have told. So if you're having questions, you can just refer some documentations, right? In each technology, there is a specific documentation, right? If you take GitHub, there is a separate documentation for GitHub as well. So you can refer those things and gain knowledge. So every time, what I request from you all is try to gain knowledge without waiting for someone to teach you. So we have come to the end of our session. So I hope you got an overall idea about the technologies and the usage of APIs and the GitHub. So that's all, and thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you so much. I honestly learned a lot from you, and it was, I think I can hear I hope. And it was really interesting with those real world examples. I hope she solved most of your confusions as well, and you got some sort of an idea about the trending technologies, their pros and cons, and how different they are and where they can be used. And of course, the most important life-saving thing, version controlling. We'll be sharing more tips and knowledge on our Instagram and Facebook pages, so make sure to follow us as well.